Hey, book lovers. Want to hear a story? Welcome back to Storytime with Em. This is a mini episode from Em's Books and Cats podcast, where I am sharing my books with you a chapter or sometimes two a week. And right now I am sharing my book SuperGym, and this is a 2-chapter episode. So this week I have chapters 21 and 22 for you. As always, SuperGym does contain mature content, which might not be suitable for all listeners, so please listen with caution. Otherwise, please enjoy chapters 21 and 22 of SuperGym. Maggie was running along a beautiful white beach. Her feet pounded out a steady rhythm on the firm sand. To her left, the waves crashed, but Maggie didn't hear them. Her heartbeat drowned out their sound. She knew something wasn't right. Until her pounding feet and thudding heart, she had heard the whine. Steady and terrible. There was no sound of crashing waves, no cool ocean breeze. The air was flat and stale. She wasn't on a beach. She was on a treadmill. Maggie ripped the viewer from her head. An alarm sounded and she heard a low rumble at her side. Thor was standing by her elbow. He shook his head slowly and made a note in her file. But something wasn't right. Thor shouldn't be there, but Maggie couldn't remember why. He reached across her and punched the buttons on the display. The belt whirred faster. She wasn't sure how her feet were keeping up. She didn't know how long she'd been running, but everything from her waist down was completely numb. She turned her head slightly from side to side. This wasn't one of the numerous cardio rooms of the SuperGym. This was unlike any room she'd seen. The walls were painted a deep emerald green. Tiny flecks of gold littered the surface. The treadmill was the only one in the room. It was a top-of-the-line model with a large display and all of the bells and whistles. Thor adjusted the speed a little higher. He made another note. "No looking around," he sneered. His face was very close, and she again felt a strange unease. "Eyes front. Focus on the horizon." Maggie ran. It wasn't bad. She actually kind of enjoyed it. She was past the painful part, and everything felt good. She could run forever. Thor made another note. He was smiling, just a little. It was almost imperceptible, but it was there. Why did his smile make her sad? "All right," Thor grunted. "Cool down. Shower. Meet me outside." He pressed a few buttons and the treadmill slowed. He left the room without a word. Maggie turned off the machine and stood in the strange, silent room. One wall didn't look right. Every so often, the green and gold would disappear, and behind the wall was a room. A small, dark, wooden room. A room left over from before. Before the SuperGyms. Before Mr. Pratt. Maggie climbed off the treadmill and cast a cautious look toward the door. Another strange thing. There was no light above the door. No way of knowing if someone was coming. She crossed the room slowly. She reached out tentatively and touched the wall. Solid. Same as the others. She leaned against it and sighed. What did she expect? Something was wrong with her. That much was obvious. She couldn't think. Couldn't remember. Her legs wobbled beneath her. She gave in and slumped to the floor. Now that she was off the machine, she was feeling woozy. Pain was beginning to seep into her muscles. The feeling returned to her legs. She pulled her knees to her chest and sobbed. She rocked back and forth and wailed. She reached up to wipe away a tear, and her hand grazed her neck. A jolt shot through her arm. She remembered that feeling. She sat up and stopped crying. She remembered. There was something around her neck. She touched it again. Another jolt, and the smell of singed flesh. That was the problem. Maggie leaned back against the wall. She could feel the heat coming off her necklace. It was suffocating her. She rolled her head from side to side. The wall glitched. Heat filled Maggie's body. Lights flashed. There was a loud popping sound followed by a sizzling. She was blind. Darkness surrounded her. She could feel the matted floor beneath her. She could smell burning hair. Her hair. And she could hear her own screams. The pain was unending. Every inch of her was in agony. She wanted to die. She heard the door open. Someone entered the room. A slight breeze washed over her, and she screamed louder. "That's enough." Thor's voice. But that wasn't right. Thor was dead. Maggie opened her eyes. Thor was standing over her. He held a syringe in one meaty paw. Maggie tried to move, and it sent fresh waves of pain rippling through her body. "Hold still." He grabbed her arm roughly and jabbed the needle into the burned meat of her upper arm. Maggie started to scream. He plunged the clear liquid into her bloodstream, and she stopped. A cool spot formed in her arm and quickly spread over her entire body. The pain vanished. She felt alert and energetic. She could feel her body beginning to repair itself. Thor squatted beside her and looked at her over his dark sunglasses. "Better?" She nodded. "Good. Get up and follow me." She was surprised at how quickly her body healed. She popped up onto her feet and was able to keep up with Thor as he stormed down the pale pink hallway. What is this place? The carpet under her sneakers was lush and pale blue. The walls were a light, airy color spotted with the occasional painting of ballerinas or sunflowers. Everything was soft and delicate. Thor stopped walking. Maggie waited for her punishment. He had not turned to look at her, but she could see the tension in his back and shoulders. He was angry. He turned slowly. He held his heavy arms out stiffly at his sides. His hands were balled into fists. "No questions. Follow me." His voice was quiet, but Maggie followed without another word. The hall ended at a golden elevator. Thor punched the button aggressively, and they waited. When the doors slid open, they were looking out at the city of Famosili. The walls of the elevator were glass. Maggie was grateful for the bright golden floor as she stepped inside. They were in a tall building in the center of Famosili. She could see the purple lights of the very first SuperGym. Pratt Towers? Thor crossed his arms and turned his back to her. The Pratt penthouse, to be exact. No more questions. She'd found a weakness. He actually answered one of her questions. "Thor, why aren't you dead?" He shifted slightly, but he didn't look at her. "I don't know what you're talking about." "We fought. I did something. That part is hazy. Trent said you were dead." "Who's Trent?" This was not the real Thor. His hatred of Trent was not something he could hide. This was an imposter. It was true. Thor was dead. The elevator descended rapidly and lurched to a sudden stop. The doors opened onto another identical hallway of soft pinks and blues. Thor was off without another word and moving double time. Maggie had to jog to keep up. She marveled at the strength of her body. It felt better than it ever had before. Thor came to a sudden stop and she bumped into him. He glared at her over his shoulder as she leaned on him to regain balance. He shrugged her off and opened a door labeled 207B. The apartment was immense. The floor and walls were sparkling white marble. One entire wall was a picture window looking out over the city. An ornate golden chandelier lit the room with hundreds of twinkling white lights. Maggie stood in the middle of the room, staring up at it, until Thor grunted loudly. He motioned to the kitchen area. It was the same layout as the other apartments. A table, a chair, and a bed. The only difference was the furniture was covered in gold. Where the refrigerator should have been, there was a small gold door set in the wall. Thor opened it and took out a shiny golden platter. On it sat a small cup of water and a large purple and green pill. 3 times a day you will open this door and consume what you find inside. No questions asked. Understood?" Maggie nodded. He set the tray on the table and crossed his arms. Maggie examined the pill for a moment, shrugged, and popped it in her mouth. The water made it go down a little easier. Thor checked her cheeks and under her tongue. When he was satisfied the pill was gone, he made a note on her chart and went to the door. Maggie hurried over and put a hand on his arm. "Thor, do you have to go?" He looked at her briefly. His sunglasses hid his expression. He shrugged her hand off and opened the door. Left alone in the apartment, Maggie didn't know what to do. She paced the giant room until it began to grow dark outside. The chandelier's brilliant light was magnified by the marble, and the walls seemed to glow. Maggie squinted against the glare. It was giving her a headache. The walls were smooth and seamless. The door was covered in gold but made from a much heavier metal. It had locked automatically when Thor left. There was no way out. A loud, incessant beeping distracted her from her thoughts. A red light above the small door in the kitchen was flashing. There was no handle on the door. Maggie touched it and it popped open. She took a step back. A robotic arm lifted the tray and carried it to her. There was another tiny cup of water and another pill. She picked up the pill and examined it. An alarm sounded. The tray began to shake. It flipped over, knocking the tiny cup to the ground, and revealed a scanner. The screen lit up, and it cast a bright green glow as it ran over her. When it reached the pill, the alarm grew louder and more urgent. Okay, I'll take it. Maggie put the pill in her mouth and swallowed hard. She opened her mouth and the scanner checked. It beeped twice, and the alarm was silent. The scanner flipped over, and the tray returned to its original place. The gold door snapped shut. Silence once again filled the apartment. She picked up the tiny cup and ran her finger around the edge. The plastic was smooth. It could not be broken or used for escape. It was useless. Maggie tossed the cup onto the table and sat down. Did she want to escape? The apartment was so much nicer than her old place, and the workouts were milder. She missed real food, but the pills made her feel comfortably full. It was a strange new sensation that she could not remember ever having before. Why would she want to leave? Her neck was growing hot. She reached instinctively for her throat, and another jolt shot through her. A wave of heat rushed through her body, and the lights flashed. On, off. It was milder this time. It didn't burn with the same intensity, and she recovered much quicker. The necklace was a ring of pain. Why did she have to wear it? She couldn't remember. If she tried to think about it, the band grew hot. It burned deep into her skin. Better not to think. If she followed her plan, the band stayed cool. It soothed her singed skin. This made her feel uneasy, but she couldn't remember why. Maggie lay down on the bed and stared up at the twinkling chandelier. It glittered high above her, impossibly out of reach. 3 golden rings hung from smallest to largest. On each were hundreds of thin, needle-like glass pieces. They looked sharp. Chapter 22. Maggie woke sometime later. Everything looked exactly the same, but the red light was flashing. The alarm wailed incessantly. She staggered across the room and opened the door. When the pill and cup were offered, she took them and swallowed the pill without hesitation. She hid the cup behind her back until the tray returned to its place and the door shut. Now she had 2 cups. Why did she want 2 cups? Maggie couldn't remember, and the necklace was getting warm. She placed the cup on the table and resumed pacing the room. There was nothing else to do, and her plan called for extra movement whenever she could fit it in. Pacing burned more calories. Maggie wondered when the next weigh-in day would be. She hadn't been on a scale in days, and she was feeling thin. It felt good. The door swung open and Mr. Pratt entered. Maggie stopped pacing. He stood just inside the door with his hands on his hips. Instead of his usual all-white outfit, He wore a pair of black running tights and a purple and green robe. He circled her silently, like a predator stalking his prey. He reached out and ran his hand through her hair. Maggie tried not to flinch away. He took her chin in his hand and turned her face from one side to the other. He grunted and walked around her a second time. His dark eyes inspected her from every angle. Suddenly, his loud laugh shattered the silence of the room, and he slapped her ass. "Now that's more like it, my dear." He snapped his fingers, and a dietitian appeared in the doorway. He was tall and pale and wore round glasses. Maggie felt her stomach lurch, and her heart rate quickened. This man was familiar. He made her nervous. Her chest was tightening, and her right arm was starting to tingle. There was a loud zapping sound. Sparks spewed from the necklace. Mr. Pratt frowned. "Something wrong, my dear?" Maggie shook her head. "No, sir." Her voice was barely a whisper. The dietitian was coming closer. Her heart was in her throat. Mr. Pratt pointed to the areas of her body while he spoke. "She's making progress. Well done, Michelson. This new program is your best yet." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." Michelson pushed his glasses up on his nose. Maggie fought the urge to scream. What was wrong with her? "Her face is thinning out nicely, but she could use some help here, and back here. Especially there." "Yes, sir." Michelson made notes in Maggie's file. Mr. Pratt grabbed a big handful of her ass and squeezed. "Just a little too much back here, my dear. But it's fixable. Michelson's a genius." "Thank you, sir." He once again pushed his glasses up. Mr. Pratt laughed loudly. He didn't let go. "Okay, Michelson, you can leave us now. Wait for me in the lab. This won't take long." No. That voice. It didn't sound like her. Not exactly. But it was familiar. The band around her neck crackled. Michelson scurried out of the room while Mr. Pratt laughed. He squeezed harder. "Well now, my dear. Time to thank Daddy." No. More sparks. Maggie knew this was an honor. She was doing well. The program was working. Mr. Pratt was proud of her. She was special. No. No. Another shower of sparks and the necklace cracked. It fell to the floor with a clang. Mr. Pratt's grip loosened. This wasn't part of his plan. It all came flooding back at once. Dr. Clyde, Thor, Trent, the wall. Mr. Pratt wrapped his arms around her and grabbed on with both hands. No! Heat rushed through Maggie's body. The muscles of her arms tingled with electricity. Her hands shot out, and Mr. Pratt's eyes grew wide. "Maggie, my dear?" She punched him in the sternum with both fists. The bone cracked. Mr. Pratt grabbed her hands. His eyes were rolling wildly in their sockets. His face went from red to dark purple. He wouldn't let go of her hands. Maggie tried to pull away, but she was spent. Mr. Pratt's breathing sounded wet, and there was blood in his mouth. It dribbled down his chin. Every breath he took sprayed her with a fine red mist. His grip loosened, and he fell to the floor. Maggie nudged him with the toe of her sneaker. He was still gurgling. The blood came in waves. It wouldn't be long. A shuddering breath bubbled out of him. Maggie stepped closer. He was gone. She turned away and then screamed when his hand shot out and grabbed her ankle. But his grip was weak, and his hand was slick with blood. She pulled away easily. Mr. Pratt groaned. Another long, wet breath escaped his lips, and then his body was still. Maggie stared at him, waiting for another breath, waiting for his hand to creep toward her. Nothing. She was crying. Tears soaked her cheeks. Her body was growing warm. She opened her hand and the golden chair flew into the air. It made a wet smacking sound as it landed on Mr. Pratt's lifeless body. She opened her other hand and the table flew up. The bed followed. She balled her hands into tight fists. When she opened them, the chandelier crashed down and impaled his lifeless body with hundreds of tiny glass daggers. Maggie stood over what was left of his body. She wanted to continue, but she was out of furniture. "You've had your revenge. Now get out of here. Run." It was nice to have other Maggie back. She threw open the door and sprinted down the hall. Every door looked exactly the same. Every door had a lock. She reached the end of the hall and found another elevator, but no stairs. "Do it, now, before it's too late." Maggie punched the button and waited. The hall was empty. From a room nearby, she heard grunting and counting, the sounds of a private workout. She had to get out of there. Where is the damn elevator? The bell dinged. A light came on. Maggie stepped into a golden box and the door slid closed. No windows. She leaned against the wall and breathed a small sigh of relief. She examined her reflection. Her face and hands were spattered in blood, and there was a reddish-brown smear on her ankle. She hoped there would be somewhere to hide when the doors opened. The elevator stopped suddenly and Maggie's stomach dropped. She took a deep breath and waited for the doors to open. She was poised and ready to sprint. The bell dinged. The doors slid open. Kylie and Andy blocked the opening. They were both clad in skimpy trainer uniforms and stood with their feet spread and their hands on their hips. Behind them stood row upon row of Mr. Pratt's goons. Each wore a black sweatsuit and a mask. They held various weapons in their gloved hands. There was at least 50 crammed into the small hallway. Maggie backed up until she bumped into the wall. She was trapped. Andy was grinning. She looked eager and ready to strike. Beside her, Kylie looked concerned. Andy put a foot in the elevator and held the door open with her muscular leg. "Well, well, well. Look, Kylie. It's Mr. Pratt's #1 client. Someone finally learned how to follow her program. Look how good she looks. Isn't she just the best?" Andy's voice was unnaturally high, and it rose with every word as she spoke. "Mr. Pratt's #1. Let's fast-track her to the trainer program. She's SuperGym's biggest success story. Aren't you so very special?" She leaned in close to Maggie and started laughing. "Looks like Mr. Pratt wasn't right about everything after all. He had a blind spot for you. I, personally, couldn't understand it. You're not special. You're just another addict. You should be dead by now." "Andy, that's enough." Kylie spoke quietly, but her voice was strong. Andy stopped speaking. They got into the elevator, but stopped the goons when they tried to follow. Kylie linked her arm through Maggie's and smiled. "We're going to have a little chat with our star client. Wait here." The doors closed and Andy pushed the button for the 9th floor. They didn't speak. The elevator whooshed to a stop and Kylie tightened her grip on Maggie's arm. Andy grinned. The bell dinged. They stepped into a large gym. It looked like a SuperGym, except the equipment was sleek and golden, the best of the best. Andy walked purposely across the room and disappeared into an open doorway marked showers. Kylie guided Maggie to a nearby stair-climbing machine. The name on the side proclaimed it to be the Stairway to Heaven. "Hop on. Might as well burn some calories while we talk." Maggie climbed on. Her back was to the shower room, and she didn't like it. She wanted to be able to see Andy coming. Kylie was smiling her bright trainer smile. She set the machine to an easy level, and Maggie started climbing. "I'll keep it easy so we can talk." She leaned on the machine. "Plus the noise will cover our voices." Her eyes looked over Maggie's shoulder. She was watching for Andy. "Kylie, what's going on?" She smiled a little and shook her head. "You know what's going on, Maggie. Don't play dumb." "How did you know?" She looked up at the ceiling. Cameras. They're everywhere. Some of them are so tiny they're almost invisible. We've been watching you, monitoring your progress. You should have stayed away from that wall. You should have stuck with the program and followed the rules. Mr. Pratt is dead. It's over. Kylie's smile grew even wider. Her eyes were bright. She laughed. It sounded strangely familiar. You are such an idiot. She laughed again. It's not over. SuperGyms are a way of life. Mr. Pratt started the healthy living movement, but he will not be its end. My father knew he was building an empire that would live on long after he was gone. Your father? Kylie nodded solemnly. Her manic smile was gone. He saved so many people. He saved the city. He was a brilliant man, a genius. Maggie couldn't breathe. Her chest was growing tighter. Heat washed over her and her hands tingled. She was gripping the handle of the stair climber tightly. She loosened her grip and flexed her fingers. Kylie saw. Her smile returned. No, Maggie. No more of that today. Something cold closed around her throat with a snap. It buzzed and grew warmer. The feeling in her hands went away. Andy stood beside Kylie. They were laughing. Kylie punched the buttons on the machine. The steps moved faster. I won't let my father's work die with him. The SuperGyms will continue. Her eyes flashed. You have done nothing but cause problems, and I'm not fooled. You're not special, Maggie. You're an addict and a fatty and a murderer. Your actions could be considered treason. I could have you killed. Maybe somewhere public. The center of the city. You could die in the same way your first kill died. Remember him? Thor's pathetic brother? She laughed at Maggie's shocked expression. Don't look so surprised. Everyone knew about that. That was your first test, and Mr. Pratt was very proud. You played along perfectly. Too bad you turned out to be so stubborn. Andy was attaching something to the back of Maggie's new necklace, a long silver chain. Andy handed it to Kylie, and she ran it lovingly through her fingers. You know, I really liked Thor. He was a mindless follower, but he was so hot. Am I right? Andy hooted and nodded her head violently in agreement. Kylie tugged on the chain, and Maggie flew back off the machine. Kylie laughed. Andy doubled over and laughed hysterically until Kylie motioned for her to stop. I've always tried to be a good trainer. I was never great, never anything special. I probably should have stayed a client, but Daddy always gave me what I wanted. He was a wonderful man. She knelt beside Maggie. I'm not a monster, my dear. You were my best client, my biggest success story. You're proof that I am the future of the SuperGyms. She held the chain lightly to her cheek. Do you like your new collar? Daddy had several different styles made. He liked the ones that turned clients into mindless fitness machines. No memories, no free will. He just wanted pure obedience. But that's not my style. I like this one. I designed it myself. You see, I'm not very good at training, but I am very good at science. This collar was made just for you. All I have to do is tighten my grip on the chain and... She squeezed, and the pain shot through Maggie's body. There was a loud pop and the smell of burning flesh. Maggie's neck burned. Kylie was laughing. I'm using your own power against you. How smart am I? Andy whooped in agreement. Kylie shushed her. She put a hand on Maggie's shoulder. Her touch made Maggie's skin ache. Her wild smile was gone, and her expression was serious. Still, you did get me my inheritance sooner than expected. Thank you for that. I thought I'd never get my chance. I mean, he was the master of health. I thought he would live forever. Kylie wasn't looking at Maggie anymore. She was staring past her with a faraway expression. If Maggie could yank the chain out of her hands, she might have a chance. She didn't see any other option. It won't work. Other Maggie's voice was quiet, but she was still there. Maggie felt a surge of hope. She wasn't alone. Andy was watching. She noticed her boss wasn't paying attention and gently touched Kylie on the shoulder. It startled her and she jumped up fast. As she did, she clamped down on the chain, and another powerful jolt rocked Maggie. Lights danced in front of her eyes. Kylie took her by the shoulders, and the pain made Maggie cry out. "I'm so sorry, my dear. I didn't intend to give you that one." She turned to glare at Andy, who slunk away and disappeared into the shower room. When she turned back to Maggie, she was smiling again. "I have a gift for you, Maggie. I think you deserve it. My father's favorite, my perfect client. You are a lucky, lucky girl. You're not going to die today. Can you believe it? Even better, you're going to get exactly what you've wanted this whole time. You're getting out. No more famicili. No more SuperGyms. You're going to the other side of the wall. Aren't you excited?" Maggie wasn't excited. She felt sick. The last blast had jolted her badly. Her eyes hurt. Everything was a dull shade of blue. Darkness was closing in. She felt her body starting to sway. Kylie cursed and called to Andy. Hands caught her and lowered her to the floor. And then she was gone. And that is the end of Chapter 22, book lovers. I hope you're enjoying SuperGym, and I hope you have enjoyed this double chapter episode. I will be back next week with another chapter. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, keep reading.